ดูก็บอกดูในแชทข้างใน
Okay, Dr. Lama's going to be in a meeting now. So. Okay. เดี๋ยวเจอกันตอน9 โมงครึ่งนะGood morning and welcome to the first roundtable of the series on the topic Indigenous Peoples and Sustainable Heritage Forum, which is brought to you jointly by the Sivantoran Anthropology Center, Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute, and UNESCO Bangkok. We are very pleased to have with us today 4 distinguished speakers who will be speaking to us on the topic of protected area management in an inclusive manner. And I will now turn the floor over to our first speaker for opening remarks. I would like to welcome Dr. Zumbig Han, Chief of the Culture Unit from UNESCO Bangkok.
Thank you, Mantira. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Komatra and Dr. Narumon, on the distinguished speakers and the audience in this Zoom room and also through our Facebook live stream. It is a great honor to be with you today in the opening of the Indigenous Peoples and Sustainable Heritage Forum. As you know, this series aims to gather practitioners, scholars, and advocates for Indigenous people's rights to discuss the challenges, opportunities faced by Indigenous people in safeguarding their cultural heritage and exercising their cultural rights. This is our modest efforts to contribute to the existing stage of knowledge, policies, and practices for Thailand and the Mekong sub-region. In organizing this forum, I acknowledge the great partnership of Siriton Anthropology Center and the Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute, as well as the contribution of all speakers, not only of this session today, but also the upcoming 3 sessions ahead that will take place between now and the beginning of June. As you might be all aware, culture and heritage are the topics that are most closely linked to the UNESCO's mandate. Our work is governed by a number of normative instruments that promote the safeguarding of cultural heritage and ensure the flourishing of cultural diversity. I would like just quickly outline a few most important ones that are relevant to our discussions in the coming today and the upcoming sessions. So first and foremost, we have the UNESCO Universal Declaration of Cultural Diversity adopted in 2001. It has been 20 years, but we can see that its principles have never become outdated. In committing to the full implementation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other universally recognized legal instruments, such as the 2 international covenants relating to civil and political rights and to economic, social, and cultural rights, the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity encourages member states to formulate policies and strategies for the preservation and enhancement of the cultural and natural heritage, notably the oral and intangible cultural heritage, and demonstrates the respect and protection of traditional knowledge, recognizing the contribution of traditional knowledge, particularly with regard to environmental protection and the management of natural resources, and fostering synergies between modern sciences and local knowledge. In terms of heritage, the 2 UNESCO conventions, the 1972 Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage, and the 2003 Convention on the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage, set out the principles and conditions for the safeguarding of the intangible and tangible heritage, set out the environment for it to be safeguarded for future generations. Within this context, the issues related to sustainable development are increasingly becoming relevant, and both conventions have taken steps to develop specific guidance to assist member states to both safeguard the heritage in the sustainable development context and to ensure the role of heritage in sustainable development. So when talking about culture and heritage, we cannot forget the people who are custodians of these cultures and heritage. Why indeed, every one of us who are here today are custodians of our own culture and heritage. Emphasis is often placed on groups of indigenous peoples and ethnic minorities who are among the most vulnerable in the world and increasingly being put to the margins economically, socially, and culturally in the name of development. Many indigenous peoples face specific challenges related to culture, such as threat to their cultural integrity, distinct lifestyle and languages, as well as to their customary law, often aggravated by assimilatory policies, practices, and development strategy that do not or insufficiently take into account culture. They experience discrimination or unfair treatment related to the cultural identity, expressions, and heritage, or use their traditional lands, territories, and cultural and natural resources. These challenges are a reason for UNESCO to ensure that its actions uphold and at least do not negatively affect the rights of indigenous peoples. So in these regards, in 2018, UNESCO issued for the first time ever our own policy on engaging with indigenous peoples, which is framed by the provisions from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. These include, and I quote some of the provisions, the rights to have full and effective participation in all matters affecting their lives and culture, rights to freely pursue their cultural development, the rights to be able to take part in the development of policies concerning their culture, cultural expressions and heritage, the rights to be able to aspire, maintain, strengthen and transmit for future generations their distinct identity, customs, knowledge and social practices, including languages. Indigenous people have the right to their traditional lands, territories, and resources, and are partners in site conservation and protection activities that recognize traditional management systems as part of new management approaches. So we will have the pleasure to explore many of these topics throughout the 4 sessions to be organized within this series and learn from our speakers about the ways these principles have been applied on the ground. After the session today on good practices in inclusive governance on protected areas, we will look deeper in session 2 and 3 on the topics of traditional knowledge and its role in achieving ecological sustainability and maritime control, heritage, and marine conservation. During session 4, we will consolidate lessons learned from the previous 3 sessions and discuss concretely what they can mean for the Thai context. At UNESCO, we are really happy to be able to join forces with Thailand in their journey to develop the new draft law on the protection and promotion of the way of life of ethnic groups. We hope that this process will create a common platform for us to work together to create an environment in which Indigenous peoples and other ethnic minority groups enjoy the rights that they deserve. So thank you once again to our partners and our 2 speakers, and I look forward to the fruitful discussion ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Han. And we have Dr. Gomat with us, but he's in the other room, so he's just about to join us. And so we'd like to invite Dr. Narumon to join us from the Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute. She's the director. Thank you very much, Dr. Narumon. And she's a longtime colleague of UNESCO, has been working with us on these issues over the last literally 20 years. And so we're very happy to be reunited with her again today.
Okay, Swadee ka. Thank you, Kun Mon, and good morning, everyone. Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute, or KUSRI, is very happy to co-host the session today, along with the upcoming 3 sessions. I think the importance of IPs, Indigenous people, ecological knowledge, and cultural heritage is not only with the issue of identity and pride, or in the case of Thailand, it helped to promote tourism. But I think the more important point is that these ecological knowledge and practices also contribute or inspire natural conservation, as we will hear today. And actually, if we go a step further, the practices and knowledge may help us to mirror or to reflect our own modern mainstream culture and development. So today is the first session about good practices or good examples of this issue that we can hear from Thailand case and India. And I think also we will hear about conservation initiatives that may be now expanding and upscaling in several countries, as well as in several projects all over the world. IUCN also defined the concept of ICCA, or Indigenous and Community Conserved Areas. So that's another initiative and inspiring concept that probably we'll hear today. And also IUCN has a concept of sacred natural site. I think it's very important and interesting as well. So I'm really glad that we'll have 4 sessions from today on to exchange international knowledge and experiences so that we might have more inspiration to work on this issue. Thank you very much and welcome you all, and back to you, Kun Mon.
Thank you very much to Ajahn Narumon ka. And now we're very glad to have with us Ajahn Gomat, director of the Sirantuan Anthropology Center, who will share with us some of the work they have been doing with this new law for the protection and promotion of the way of life of ethnic groups, and how our work here today will be able to contribute to that. Chen Ka Chan Koma. อาจารย์ก็มาต้องกดไมค์นะคะ
อาจารย์ใส่หูฟังไม่เอาแบ็คกราวด์ออกได้ไหม
เดี๋ยวเชิญอาจารย์โกมาสเลยค่ะ
Yes, can you hear me? Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for some technical problems, which always like in the situation that we need relied on this technology most, and it's just not working well. Let me start with a kind of personal stories here. Decades ago, when I was at medical school, I traveled to the northern part of Thailand, and in one of the local schools, there was a sign putting on in front of the school gate, saying that it's a native language forbidden zone. That was a few decades ago. I was quite amazed by the sign in the front of the school, and I was born in a province on the northeastern border between Thai and Cambodian country. I was always speak to people in their own native language, but in this school there was a sign saying that native language forbidden zone. No student in school should be speaking any native or indigenous language. That was some 25 years ago, and it was still very vivid in my memory. But I think Thailand have gone quite a long way since. In the past decade that we at the Sirantuan Anthropology Center started working very closely with indigenous people to ensure that their right, their cultural right, their entitlement, ways of indigenous practices and their way of life is protected. Working very closely with Dr. Narumon and other research institutes, looking into ways and means that we can ensure to protect local way of life by at the same time encourage the public at large to be more tolerant, to be more received and accept different way of living in the world. In the society and in the Sirantuan Anthropological Center here, we have set up 3 main tasks for the academic institute to work on creating knowledge and advocate policies by working closer to our policy partner, try to create political dialogue with many parties that would be encouraging to protect the way of life of indigenous people. We have three main areas of interest as of now. The first is to work into the practice of prejudice and discrimination. We really want to build a strong groundwork for looking into the future that we can work against this prejudice and discrimination. The second area that we really want to look into is this cultural heritage and local cultural practice, which we think can be a form of cultural capital that enrich local people negotiation power, or even help them to find new ways of working around this problem that would use cultural capital to enrich their life and the quality of life. The third area that we are really much interested in is cultural practices and cultural diversity to ensure the sustainability of developmental sustainability. So three areas coming really well together in these 4 sessions that we are going to have roundtable, and I think this event will really help us to go forward, supporting the effort to make the law that we are currently drafting on the promotion and protection of way of life of ethnic groups in Thailand. I want to thank you, everyone that come to these sessions, especially Ajahn Narumon, Montira, and our SAC staff that have been working to set up this thing, as well as speakers, everyone that come to join this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Komat. And so with this kind of background of the overall situation, I think it gives us a good idea about how to proceed in terms of the upcoming 4 sessions that we have, where we try to bring in a variety of perspectives from around the Asia Pacific region, from international standard setting agencies, but also from local practitioners and local people as well. And so before we proceed, because we have a few people who are just joining us now, we are, through the Zoom session today, we are offering both Thai simultaneous translation as well as English. And so if anyone would like to follow on the Thai translation, please go down to the bottom of the Zoom link. There is a button which says English, but you can also pick Thai. And so that will allow you to access the Thai translation. Secondly, we are also coming to you live on Facebook Live through the Sivanthorn Anthropology Center, through Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute, and through UNESCO Bangkok. The Facebook Live feed is offered to you in Thai language. So if anyone is watching on Facebook Live and would like to join us through English instead, you can join us on the Zoom link, which you will find on the poster advertising the event, to the QR code. And so without further ado, I'd like to now turn over to Dr. Han, who will introduce our 4 speakers and then who will moderate our panel discussion at the end, where we will exchange some perspectives. Dr. Han, please.
Thank you, Montira. So moving right along, so we are now officially beginning the first session of this series. The first session, we would like to focus on the hearing about the good practices in inclusive governance of protected areas. So for this session today, we have an honor to welcome 4 distinguished speakers, 2 of them working for international standard setting agencies and some of the biggest agencies, development agencies working in the conservation area, UNDP and IUCN. And we would also have opportunities to listen to really on the ground concrete cases of India and Thailand. So perhaps let me, I would introduce the speakers before each of the presentation. So we would hear each presentation lasting about 20 minutes, and then at the end, we would have about 30 minutes for panel discussion. So if you, while you are listening, if you have any immediate thought or question, please pop it in the chat. If you are in the Zoom room, and also on Facebook if you are following a Facebook Live. And I hope that our team would be able to also pick questions from the Facebook Live to insert in the Zoom, so that it will be easier for the speakers to maybe have a look before the panel discussion. So the first speaker with us today, we have Dr. Terence Hay-Eddy, who is currently a program advisor for the UNDP implemented GEF, small grant program, and manager of the global ICCA support initiative funded by the German Federal Ministry of the Environment. Since its inception in 1992, the SGP has provided cumulative funding of over 800 million to civil society organizations in 133 countries worldwide to develop innovative nature-based solutions to address the interlinked crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, and land degradation. Dr. Terence Hay-Eddy holds a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Cambridge. So today, Dr. Terence would talk to us about supporting collaborative governance of World Heritage Sites through the Community Management of Protected Area Conservation Initiative, or often known as COMPACT. Over to you, Dr. Terence.
Thank you very much, Han. It is a great honor and pleasure to be with you this morning here in Bangkok. As mentioned, I currently work with UNDP, but I used to work with UNESCO, with the World Heritage Center and other parts of UNESCO in the past. So I guess I will share my own screen, or would you? I can go ahead and do that.
If you can, then that would be easier for you to maneuver, but if it doesn't work, then we can share it from our end.
Yeah, let me. Okay. So can you see that?
Yes, yes. Yes, we can. Yeah.
So just to start, I would like to recall that at the 5th World Parks Congress in 2003, Nelson Mandela reflected upon the history of protected areas since, I guess, they were first invented or created in the 1800s in the United States, and certainly in Africa, the growth of protected areas in the 1950s, natural sites, was marked by a period of in some cases maybe lack of concern for rights and in other cases of dispossession. And so you see there a quote that really, without taking into account the rights of the local communities and indigenous peoples in these areas, that really in the long term protected areas would not ultimately be viable. I think what I will be speaking about is more on the perspective of World Heritage, but we will also touch upon some of the expanding governance types around protected and conserved areas within the context of the CBD. So the conceptual underpinnings, of course, of this are the relationship between nature and culture that have already been evoked by Han and others in contextualizing these discussions. And the 1972 Convention on World Heritage has both natural and cultural criteria, and we've seen over time an evolution towards the greater integration of sites which are not just either natural or cultural and more mixed sites. In the 1990s, we saw the introduction of the concept of cultural landscapes. Some of the first such sites were areas of relevance where indigenous peoples were living, such as Mount Tongariro in New Zealand, which is a sacred mountain for the Maori, Uluru Ayers Rock in Australia, and so on. And so you see, and of course, the Benawi rice terraces, amongst other sites here in Asia. Some of my own research has been on specifically on cultural landscapes as well. And then protected areas are also within the UNESCO context seen as areas to experiment with new forms of sustainable development. Some of the areas in question have a high degree of overlap between the World Heritage Convention and other instruments such as biosphere reserves, where you have buffer zones and areas of transition zones and so on. And I'll be talking a bit about that in terms of partnerships between UNDP and UNESCO in engaging communities in those wider landscapes. So just to recall that the convention about 15 years ago updated its what they call the 5 Cs in terms of the ones you see on the screen there, and one of the critical ones was the notion of engaging communities as part of a living heritage. And so in the publication there were some submissions from UNDP around what I'll be talking about on compact and other things. Now, you'll hear from Scott around the IUCN matrix and of different management types and governance types. I put this slide here because for some communities, in fact, historically protected areas have been superimposed on their territories without much free, prior, and informed consent, and there's been an evolution towards more participatory governance in the way in which areas are gazetted and so on. And so some of my research was in Nepal on the way in which local communities, whether it was in the Kathmandu Valley or in other natural sites such as Sagarmatha, perceived the superimposition of the protected area. So for example, the Sherpa people of Mount Everest, Sagarmatha, that site was initially just a natural site, and it's only later that some of the cultural values have been more significantly recognized in the values of the outstanding universal values of Sagarmatha. So now, and this is also relevant because of the debates in the conventional biological diversity CBD around a 30% by 2030 target. We've just gone past the 2020 IG targets in December of 17% of terrestrial and coverage. Now, you can see in the graphs there the expansion, the rapid expansion of protected and conserved areas. So this terminology is evolving. The idea of a protected area is no longer simply one of government governance. We were seeing many different forms of governance, indeed overlapping forms of governance within the same landscapes, and different countries on the bottom right within Asia have different percentages of so for example from Bhutan, which has a very high percentage, almost 50%, to other countries with lower. However, that doesn't mean that there are not effective conservation, area-based conservation, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But essentially, if by 2030, 30% is the target, then a lot of thinking has to go into what is equitable and effective governance. So this is the matrix I was just referring to. It's a series of intersecting management categories and governance types. And in some countries, historically, governance has only been type A, by government, that the gazettement of an area would precipitate a professionalization of management and of professional rangers and managers. In 2008, and this was of course greatly expanded to look at type B shared governance, the role of privately protected areas, not private protected areas, and type D on ICCAs. So as was mentioned, I manage the Global ICCA Support Initiative in UNDP. We work with 45 countries to greatly support the role of Indigenous peoples and local communities in that work. However, today I will speak a bit more about the Compact Partnership, which was a collaboration between UNESCO, UNDP, Foundation, and the GEF in terms of shared governance arrangements. So this was an initiative which was launched in the year 2000. This was approximately around the 30th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, where there was a desire to look at sustainable development initiatives through integrated conservation development programs, and to prove that they are effective. And 8 sites were selected globally. I won't go into all of them, but from different continents, from Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya in Africa, through to sites in South America and some in Asia. And one of the things that the UN Foundation, which was founded by Ted Turner with a big emphasis on communications, was that World Heritage sites are iconic sites which really will set the standard for other sites nationally and internationally, and in a sense the eyes of the world come to you. I'll not touch upon this too much, but 20 years ago there was a concern that, as I mentioned earlier, that some communities within a World Heritage site may not even be aware that they are within that site. So that was something that needed to be addressed, involving those communities in sustainable development initiatives, and then how to map and reduce the threats through different forms of engagement with civil society, through different means. And I'll talk a little bit about that, including grant making. So there isn't time to go into this methodology. There is a kit, a methodology toolkit on the UNESCO World Heritage Center's website. And essentially, there are 4 elements that you see there. Some of it is around the planning in terms of how community engagement can best be designed. The governance in terms of the intervention through grants, including through local consultative bodies, and then other upstream processes around nominations and so on, which have also been addressed through Compact in parts of the world, such as Madagascar, in helping in nominating sites. So this part of the planning framework is important, because not every threat to a protected area can be addressed through community-based interventions. Some large-scale threats would not be relevant. Others, in terms of sustainable use and so on, are much more closely aligned to the everyday concerns of people living in those landscapes. We in UNDP, we've organized a series of workshops and trainings around this conceptual modeling approach. It's linked to also the way in which certain indicators can be tracked and monitored over time. There won't be, can't get into a lot of detail on this, but it's available, as I mentioned, in the publication. So ultimately, though, probably the key element of Compact was that actual grant making would happen to civil society groups in these landscapes. And here you see an example of a World Heritage Site and Biosphere Reserve, in this case in Mexico on the coast, where over 50 small grants were funded with fishing communities, indigenous Mayan people around traditional knowledge of, on the left you see amphibians and reptiles, or beekeeping, sustainable forestry, traditional knowledge of judges in adjudicating disputes, native seeds, ecotourism, a whole range of different, and this is an area with a high degree of tourism on the Yucatan Peninsula. And what I would like to basically stress here is that through that, this was over a 12 to 13 year period. Through that grant making experience, something happens which goes beyond the sum of the parts, is that all of these different initiatives interact, so that here, in a sense, you see an emergent form of governance by which the lobster projects on the coast, in terms of sustainable production of seafood, feeds into the supply chain for the tourism in the area, or the sustainable forestry works with the beekeepers for making the improved hives and so on. So the learning by doing and iterations of sustainable development interventions through rapid learning is very, very critical. I think my time is probably, I only have 2 or 3 more slides, so I will move along. Now, this is another site in the Philippines, in Palawan Island, Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park, where Compact worked alongside some of the structures in the Philippines. They have a protected area management board. It's called a PAMB, but to use that to form a local consultative body to review the needs of the indigenous peoples living in and around that protected area. And the same steps I was describing were followed in terms of the planning process, and then the interventions supported some of the available legislation in the Philippines around titles for ancestral domains. Indigenous peoples were given responsibilities as forest wardens and fish wardens on the coast, and a series of small grants were funded around forest enrichment, you see on the bottom right there, and ecotourism, both marine, terrestrial, and other forms of livelihoods. So in 2017, here in Thailand, we also organized a workshop with the Department of National Parks. IUCN, Scott, who will be speaking later, was with us to share this compact methodology, and it was translated into Thai. This was over a 3-4 day period. And my colleague from the Jeff Small Grants program here in Thailand is now at the stage of rolling out the geographic focus. There are 4 of them within Thailand, including the north and the far south, to provide grants to communities in and around Kangkrachang Forest Complex. And so this is my last slide. So just to conclude by saying that there is an MOU between UNDP and UNESCO and the CBD around Compact. We were hoping to update this for the World Heritage Committee last year, and to bring it up to date in relation to, and I think the World Heritage Committee will proceed in June in China. So you see there some of the key points which were in the publication around collaboration on Compact. So the notion of a local consultative body for protected areas, I think, is good practice, good governance. If there can be some analysis of how to finance these funding schemes for engaging communities in those protected areas. That's a critical part of it. And then looking at some of the other approaches that are quite well recognized in terms of management effectiveness, but looking at it more broadly from a governance lens. So I think I will stop there, and hopefully I didn't exceed my time. So thank you very much, Han, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Terence. Yeah, for giving us some ideas about the compact and then how it actually applies on the ground. And I'm very impressed that, yeah, there's such a long-term support, 12 to 13 years. And I think that's really the time that we need, I mean, to make any changes that happen. And unfortunately, many of the project cycles that we are doing, including our own UNESCO, often do not have that luxury. So really good to hear that 3 or 4 more sites in Thailand would be benefiting from this kind of support. So thank you, Terence. We'll get back to you at the panel discussion. And so now let's move on to India with Dr. Sonali Ghosh. We saw that the COVID situation there is a little challenging right now. So we hope that you are safe and sound, and the situation will get better soon. So Dr. Sonali Ghosh is an Indian Forest Service officer with more than 20 years of work experience in the field of forest and wildlife conservation in India. She holds a PhD degree in physical geography from United Kingdom. As part of her job, she has worked as a field manager in UNESCO designated World Natural Heritage Sites of Kaziranga and Manas. She has traveled extensively and written about forest and people's livelihood issues in Northeast India. And she also has served as a founding faculty at the Category 2 Center, which is the center under UNESCO auspices on World Natural Heritage Management and Training for Asia and the Pacific region. And she is currently serving as Deputy Inspector General of Forest Central Zoo Authority. So today she will share with us case studies with reference to Manas World Heritage Sites entitled Reflection on Rights-Based Approaches in Nature Conservation. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you, ma'am. And indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here today. I've just completed one a good course on sustainable heritage management, which was organized by Think City and UNESCO Bangkok. And I must, at the onset, thank Ms. Montira, who was our mentor in that course. And of course, she had helped us, and then she suggested that I be part of this. So thank you so much. Yes, the COVID situation is worrying. My family has just recovered from a 17-day quarantine that we had. So hopefully, fingers crossed that things will be fine. Today, and I hope my screen is visible, I would be talking about some of the ideas that I have kind of, based on my own experience of working in natural heritage sites, have now kind of learned, and I'm more convinced that that's the way forward. So I shall be talking about it. And of course, there's a bit of a context. Terence has made my life easier by talking about some of the ideas around natural heritage. And of course, I would like to speak about 2 case studies. Manas, of course, where I have worked as a site manager, and another case study from Western Ghats, which is another natural heritage site where we did a small project as part of the Category 2 Center. This is something which was very, very interesting while I was researching for this talk. And if you see some of the kind of global metadata, you find, and this is so obvious, that the areas, the regions of global biodiversity are also the regions of high ethnic diversity. So as essentially, the more complex the ecosystem, the more flora and fauna elements that we have, the more intense is the kind of ethnic communities or tribal cultural systems that we find in these landscapes. So the point here is that while we do say that we need to protect and set aside wildernesses, we cannot discount for the fact that there are communities, there are indigenous people or indigenous systems that need to be protected at the same time in these landscapes. Of course, we are aware of the World Heritage Convention. Many of us say that it started with the fact that the Abu Simbel temple needed to be relocated when the Aswan Dam was coming, but at the same time, many of us feel that it was basically the 1920s idea of wildernesses and the fact that there should be areas which should be preserved for posterity and for future generations are the concepts which kind of helped in giving this convention a sort of a legal support. And of course, natural heritage is a very, very strong component of this convention. As a practitioner, to me, this is such a beautiful convention which actually looks at both nature and culture. There is no other, in my opinion, which can actually marry the two or even think about looking at both of these elements together. And this is again a very popular slide where we do think of UNESCO or the World Heritage at the top of this pyramid, which is able to give an overarching and encompassing protection and manage sort of a recognition to the protected areas that we are looking at in the global context. Giving some examples again from India, and perhaps this is true for the most of South Asia and Southeast Asia, is that in our countries, there are some very intrinsic nature-culture relationships, which are bordering intangible. At the same time, we do have some very relevant and living examples as on today. On the top left, what you see is a very unique example of a deity which is worshipped both by the Hindus and the Muslim community in the Sundarbans World Heritage landscape. And such is the belief that the people would worship Bon Bibi, the goddess there, before entering the forest for their own safe return back to their homes. So these kind of linkages, especially if you look at our mountain landscapes, almost all the Himalayan landscapes which are part of the heritage, for example, be it Sagarmatha, Nanda Devi, Kanchenjunga, they are all linked to some sort of belief or some sort of a sacred and cultural value to the people. And that's another reason why they have been preserved, or the pristine values have been preserved over centuries. So this is a very important link and element which needs to be acknowledged and also included when we are looking at our governance model. Of course, we have the outstanding universal value and the three pillars that protect these outstanding universal value. Just a thought that there is a need to include communities, include right-based approaches perhaps somewhere in this to look at OUV eventually. And we did discuss about the global examples, and as Terence was mentioning about this classic example, which even Dr. McTill often gives in her presentations, is the Uluru Katajata National Park in Australia. And it's amazing and it's appreciable and commendable for the state party that a protected area, which was earlier nominated and inscribed as a natural heritage, goes through the entire process again and becomes a cultural landscape, because they realize that they need to protect the traditional belief systems of one of the oldest human societies in the world. So this kind of an acknowledgement and this kind of a recognition to the communities is something which is extremely commendable. Of course, I have read this about Kankrachan Forest Complex. I have been looking at some of the reports that have been published. And here again, it's a fantastic landscape. It's a landscape which I have worked very closely with on the Indian side. And I'm aware that this contiguous transboundary landscape, which goes from India, Myanmar into Thailand, is one of the most fabulous landscapes that we can have for our megafauna like tigers and elephants. But at the same time, there are a lot of communities, a lot of traditional livelihoods that need to be protected. And I think for me personally, the convention is one of the best platforms that can acknowledge the two. So coming to the case studies, and this is something which we have worked on that I would like to share. The first is regarding Western Ghats. Now, Western Ghats is also a natural heritage site in India. The amazing fact about Western Ghats is that there are 39 serial sites spread across 4 provinces. So it was for the fact that even the process of inscribing Western Ghats has been a very methodical and extremely powerful process in which both the natural aspects as well as the traditional and the local community aspirations have been met with. And in this landscape, you have one of the world's 8 hottest biodiversity hotspots. There are at least 325 globally threatened species, a spectacular array of evergreen forests, ensconced in valleys, grasslands, and so on. So the biodiversity of this landscape is extremely well known. Within this cluster, we have the Sahyadri subcluster, which is in the Maharashtra province, where you have 3 protected areas. And of course, the biodiversity element of these protected areas were very well known. But we wanted to understand that what are the community benefits that the people get from this protected area. So there is the concept of ecosystem services to look at how the natural elements contribute to the people's well-being, to the nature's contributions to people, as the IPBS calls it nowadays, is to understand that how the local community is benefited by the protected area. And we did a short study, and we found that the local community were able to get more agricultural production if they were within the vicinity of the protected area. This was largely due to the fact that there was better soil and moisture retention. The agricultural produce was therefore better in these areas. The rainfall was higher. And of course, in terms of the livelihood support or the benefit they would get from tourism, there was extremely good importance of certain protected areas which were on the tourism circuit. So in terms of the benefits to the local community, the visitor was willing to pay more for better tourism facilities vis-a-vis the conservation aspect. So there was a need to come up with a plan so that the conservation or the biodiversity elements of these areas was also highlighted. So what was it that we were able to derive out of it? That clearly the people's livelihood dependency had increased after the World Heritage, it was inscribed as a site. But also at the same time, the importance of sacred groves, the traditional knowledge, had diminished over a period of time. And while legal provisions such as a strict national park, banning of grazing or banning of people coming into the protected area had helped in preserving the integrity of the site as a natural heritage, but at the same time, there was a slight or a gradual weaning away of the local communities. So that was a short study where we were able to give an example of how a natural site helped the local communities. Coming to another, which is more interesting and more closer to my heart, is the Manas Tiger Reserve, which, as I was mentioning, is a site which is contiguous in the forest landscape, even up to Thailand. It was a World Heritage Site declared in 1985, but a site declared as in danger in 1992. And it's a region which has also got several multiple designations. It's legally protected as a tiger reserve in our country. It was a biosphere reserve, but currently not on the network of biosphere reserves. It's an important bird area and an elephant reserve. And because of its unique location geographically, if you see, it's contiguous with the Royal Manas, which is again on the tentative list in Bhutan, and the forests are contiguous into Arunachal, Myanmar, and then they run into Thailand and so on. So this, as the biologists and the scientists say, is the single largest tiger conservation landscape in the world if it is protected well. At the same time, this is an area which has a multitude of ethnic communities. So there are more than 5 ethnic communities which are residing in this landscape. And 1985 is the time when it was inscribed, and 1992, within a span of less than 6 years, because of the armed conflict region, this park was put on the site in danger list of the World Heritage. And the primary reasons were, of course, civil unrest, the poaching to the point of virtual extinction of the big mammals. For example, rhinos were completely poached out of the site. There was forced evacuation of park staff, and basically it was the biggest period of turmoil in the history of that landscape, where armed conflict and civil unrest led to the complete deterioration of the park's OUV. And it took us almost 19 years until 2011 that gradual inputs and gradual recognition of the other elements of how the park can come back on its rails and come back and regain its OUV were tried and tested. And to me, the most important element was the local ownership, the local political governments, which were put in place after a democratic election of the local communities in 2003 to 2005, was a very, very important aspect that helped the local community or the local people to have a sense of ownership for this protected area. And of course, the political will that supported the protected area in terms of reviving it. There were unique community conservation models, which I'll be talking about in my next slides. There was science-based interventions into the protected area. So the rhinos were brought back into the protected area. There was monitoring, scientific monitoring of the existing populations of tigers and elephants put into place. And there was communication and cooperation from various NGOs, various stakeholders, which came in to support the cause. So this is the community conservation model, which was very unique to this landscape. And I firmly believe that what Terence was mentioning about these governance models, that the shared governance models sometimes work in areas such as Manas, which have just come out of a period of long civil unrest. So this is where the hunters, the poachers, who were earlier going into the forest because there was no other means for them, they were brought in, they were mainstreamed, and these people were employed by the department to now be the saviors or the protectors of the forest. So this was a community conservation model which perhaps helped. And a lot of these people, a lot of these communities, then rather than becoming hostile to the department, joined hands with the department in co-managing the protected area. And of course, the woman, and this is again from experience, that the gender and for that matter, the support of the local forest fringe women is extremely important, because these are the people, these are the local communities, and within them, the women are the first stakeholders when we are coming at local community conservation models, and they need to be taken into confidence. So while the protected area was being managed and scientific interventions were happening, at the same time for the communities in the fringe villages, there were also incentives created. So there was livelihood support options given by the department, such as fisheries and plantations and so on. And it is because of this and because of these sustained efforts that finally in 2011, that the UNESCO decided that this is a site which can be now put back on the site inscribed as a site. So this has been a great journey. A lot has been spoken. Even now it is volatile. There are certain elements that need correction. There are certain elements which have really gathered strength. And very recently, only last week, the IUCN Rangers Award was given to Manas. So for me, both the Manas revival story and the community revival story are to be sung together. I mean, it is because of the communities that Manas has regained its strength. And even within the communities, there is this growing interest that yes, we need to protect our forests, we need to work towards doing conservation, because that's what will eventually help them. And at the same time, there is a need to sustain capacities for traditional ecological knowledge. It is eroding, it is being forgotten in many places. And at the same time, the youth in these local communities need to be made aware that, yes, these are some of these best practices of traditional ecological knowledge are important and can be still continued and for your help. And rights of individuals and communities associated with World Heritage must be part of localized management. I'm still not sure how it would come together in the protected area management, because our current laws, our legal laws are very bracketed. So for example, we have the Wildlife Protection Law, we have the Biodiversity Act, but they all seem to be silos or kind of compartments. But at the local governance level, there is a scope that there could be an arrangement or an understanding that, yes, these are the community rights which are good for the park and they should be carried forward. And of course, like the Maharashtra, the Western Ghats case study is the extensive use of tourism for livelihood support. Is that something which will benefit the protected area in the long run? Or is there something called animal rights, or setting aside wildernesses is something that we need to look at? And this is my last slide. And so to me, it has been a lifelong learning journey. And to me, I think it's important that there is a need for increased dialogue and sustained participation of stakeholders. That is what I have learned as a forester, that we cannot work in isolation, and the communities, the people need to be included in all the management approaches that we do. Of course, for us, the critical challenge is how do we revive or revisit the traditional rights and spiritual cultural values? So is there a possibility of a middle approach to understand and bridge the gap between natural heritage management and the local community's aspirations. And perhaps at the policy level, maybe there is a need to look at convergence or understandings under the other conventions. For example, the Convention on Safeguarding of Intangible and the Convention of Protection and Promotion of Diversity of Cultural Expressions. So thank you so much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'll be available for questions during this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonali. Yeah, and especially very useful for us that you summarize at the end the lessons learned that you got through this very long process working with these issues in India. And I especially love the reference that you made in the beginning about the correlation between the ethnic diversity and cultural and biodiversity, because I mean this is not a competition, but we do see that yes, the biodiversity issue often really got the spotlight, and I think now is really the time that we try to prove that there's a strong connection between the two. So we have a little announcement that the UNESCO Bangkok Facebook Live that you are following, it would be only available in English. So for those who are Thai speakers, please go to the Zoom. You can see the Zoom link up there on the screen, or you can also go to the Facebook of the Siriton Anthropology Center, and that's where you could see the Thai language version. And if you are a Thai speaker, when you go to the Zoom here, you could also go into the interpretation section. Underneath there, you see an icon, and then you pick the Thai language room. So I hope that, yeah, like either way, you would be able to follow this very interesting discussion and presentations. So now let's move back to Thailand, where we will hear from Dr. Prasert Trakan-Supakon on shared responsibilities, cases of participatory governance in Thailand protected areas. Dr. Prasert is an indigenous Pakanyao or Karen who received a doctoral degree in sociology. He has conducted research on Karen rotational farming system and other forms of indigenous knowledge and traditions like songs and lyrics, education and learning, mostly in relation to national resources management. Dr. Prasert has long been engaging in development work and has worked for organizations like Inter-Mountain Peoples Education and Culture in Thailand Association, short for IMPACT, Indigenous Knowledge and Peoples Network Thailand, and currently he serves as the Managing Director of Pakanyao Association for Sustainable Development, PASD. So over to you, Dr. Prasert.
Thank you very much. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Can you see?
We can see. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we talk about the pilot assessment using Wakatane mechanism in Opluan National Park in northern Thailand. The Wakatane chosen as one of the pilot areas for assessment using Wakatane mechanism. The area used to conduct assessment was the Opluan National Park in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Yeah, Opluan, it is in northern Thailand, in the Chiang Mai province, in the west of Chiang Mai side. Yeah, you can see that it's connected to different sub-district, district. In the west is Mejam, in the south is Hort. Also in the east, it is Chom Thong. The Oblong National Park composes of 6 main watershed sources. We call Metia Meta watershed, Mesoy, yeah, and Mepe, Melong, Mehot, and Mepapai, 6 small sub watershed. They are home of the Karen people of Pagillon, and also the Hmong and lowland Thai, so-called with 3 groups there. Before 1985, all groups, both highland and lowland community, live in harmony and peaceful. They have a good relation to each other, support each other, and visit to each other. They call each other Seal, means a friend. That I like to give a little bit background, ecology knowledge, belief system related to national resources of the Pagillon people of Karen. Pagillon believe them or the great grandmother Bayan tree as their ancestor. So that's why Karen people, they are really respect on nature and take care of nature. The Bayan tree goddess as the first ancestor of Pagillon. Another thing, when they get birth, they have a depot to umbilical cord trees that the umbilical of the child need to put there, and the trees belong to the child, spirit or soul are there, so need to take care of the tree. We also believe the soul of the newborn baby is hung in the tree, and the soul of the human, they have 37 souls. So 5 souls in our own body and another 33 souls in nature. So that's why they care of their soul, they need to care of nature. Another part of the ecology knowledge through the poem, a song, they call it like use the river with care, use land and water with care. And otherwise, one giver dies, 7 forests become sorrowful. 1 hornbill dies, 7 million trees become lonely. This kind of the current poem relate to the nature. Although the use only an amount of small trash basket whole, care for the whole big basket, equivalent to the think globally, act locally. That's the philosophy of the current people. In 1985 to 1992, in Oblong National Park and around the national park with the communities that have some change. Started with the introduction of new agricultural techniques and cash crops to highland community by external development agency, both national, international agency, or we know it as a bilateral project, or in Thailand they call opium replacement project that come to the community around the national park. Another thing, the expansion of cash crop planting and fruit orchards in lowland areas that increases, particularly lamjai as the main orchards, fruit trees that they need also a lot of land, a lot of water in the summertime. Is another phenomenon. The third one, the reforestation project took place in the area by the Royal Forestry Department, especially in the watershed area or the area that what we call overlap with the people in the highland, like Karen and Hmong. The NGO came also in the support lowland and highland community, both the lowland growth and the highland growth, and become a conflict or idea about the dark greens and forest with the harmonies with the human. So natural resource management policy of government become restrictive more and more at that time. the growing the demands of community right over the land or natural resource management is increasing. Some incidents happen, like a long drought, water shortage, forest fire, crop failures. All kinds of it become an accusation, highland or using more water and causing water shortage. And the lowland need more water, so become a conflict over natural resource use, and management started and turned into violence in 1998. This offense of reforestation of forestry in the land overlap with the highland communities become a conflict there. And this the block road by the lowland people that they have what we call conflict on the resource, on use water and other things. So this become a strong conflict between highland and lowland. For the highland people, they have a demands of community rights. More and more, they have a demonstration in Chiang Mai for claim about the land rights in their territory. Then the solution of this, 2001-2003, Office of Natural Resource Environment Policy and Plan, Ministry of Natural Resource and Environment, developed together with university. They do the research and develop a long-term plan for management. 2002 to 2006 pilot project to promote participatory forest management in protected area in the Oblua, initiated by Department of National Park. 2006 to 2008, they call it joint management in protected area projects coming. They're supported by Danida, Denmark, making co-management working. These are the proposed to strengthen the working mechanism set up during pilot project, watershed network committee, implementation of joint activities like a land use demarcation, development of common rules agreement on national resource management, reforestation, construction and maintenance of forest fire boundary, check dam as bit of the community fund. Okay. And yes, then the mission all stakeholders that include the Mission National Park, yeah, and also the local community and local authority like Tesban or Tesban and Oboto, and also the NGO who are involved in to work together to support the local to co-management starting, and have a lot of meeting between the even the work team of the stakeholder and together with a leader for each community in the 6 watershed area. Many meetings started then, and they have a assembly sub watershed committee. That means that each community they have a committee. After that, in this what we call the different committee in the same watershed, they come together as one committee, and they work together, make some agreement, make decision together on that process. Yeah, that activity start with to boundary in the area, the separate land use area, the forest area, and do the demarcation of the areas. This you can see the actively participate between the national park, the officer, the local authority, and the villages. do the what we call the survey, then do the boundary together, do the marketing, the zoning that they already boundary, and the same also there. Not just do the boundary, but they also have kinds of ceremonies, offering for the spirit to take care of the process. And also they also have a board on the regulation of how to manage the resources of different areas. Just showed you that details, the mapping, the what we call classify different kinds of forests and land use in the area. Here you can see that around 85.2, which is forest area, only around 10 or 15, it is the land use area. This is another example of land use map agreed, endorsed by the watershed committee. Each watershed, they have their own map and also clearly boundary in the zoning of the land use and forest. After that, they sign together with the different stakeholders, for national park, for the authority, for the local people themselves. Key outcome, natural resources have been protected, forest cover have been increasing. Second, local community gains more confidence in using their land and resources. Third, establishment of good relationship among involved stakeholders. Four, conflicts over natural resource and use, natural resource and use decrease, so the conflict decrease. Problem and articles, existing forestry laws are not in favor of community rights. It is one of the problem. Disruption of project implementation, no continuing follow-up activities. This is something that just stop there, not continue. No applicable or good practice in this area. Assessment using Vakataney mechanism. Yeah, just briefly to realize the new conservation paradigm is one of the objectives. Enable indigenous local community affected by protected area to address the effect to injustice against them in the name of conservation. Celebration and promote best practice is another objective. What does it come from? Basically required Durban Accord, the WPC 2003. Full participation is being managed protected area. Traditional knowledge, customary law practice there. Future protected area is full comply with the rights, cause and benefit. Historical injustice need to improve this kind of thing. Shifts on sharing power. The WCC 4 resolution, it is a mechanism to advance key recommendation of Durban Accord. Resolution implement of the UN DRIP, also this one. Methodology, multi-stakeholder fieldwork, higher level dialogue and develop common strategy. Also, has a potential to effective. Yes. These are some kinds of the indicate or the composition of the team. That the real objectives in the Thailand is to assess situation of indigenous people and local community in and outside of Blue National Park through existing management practice. Involve organizations, different stakeholders, different organizations involved this process. The study type is selected in 8 groups to the study. Assessment, they are prepared December, January, April. They are finished. Then they define with him all the details of how to make a survey. Assessment framework, state indigenous wisdom, custom, and culture in natural resource management. Status on natural resource environment management rights, study mechanisms that make co-management work, community effort, conflict management, coordination, participation, all sectors, identification of gaps. Key outcome and lesson learned. Traditional knowledge does exist, but need to further strengthen and transmit to younger nations. Second, right to national resource management and use. No legal recognized but assume basic rights on natural resources use and management. Watershed committee have been functioning well. Recommendation. Adoption of new paradigm conservation as agreed in various international conventions, including the IUCN resolution, using multi-stakeholder approach in natural resource management. For action, continue support co-management protected areas based practice model. Second, replication of this good practice to other protected areas. For the process, review policies are planned to allow full and effective implementation participation of indigenous and local community in natural resources. Legalization of special use zone concept to allow indigenous people and traditional community to sustain, use, and take care of their natural resources. Third, restructure institutional organization structure to allow full effective participation of indigenous people. Recommendation from our pilot assessment. One, strengthen the joint management approach by enhanced role of indigenous community in overall governance and management of the park. Second, recognize full community rights over customary areas. At three, address how the park can contribute to enhance people's livelihood. For the use of as model for other national parks in the country, especially where top-down exclusionary conservation approach include violent eviction are still in use. Reform outdated national laws and policies. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for giving us a very detailed rundown of these couple of cases that you directly involved in. So in the interest of time, we are running a little bit behind time. So let's move on to the next and final speakers today. But may I just remind everyone that if you have questions that you want to ask any of the panelists, please put that in the chat here, or if you are following us on Facebook, you could also put the questions in the comment box, and we will be transferring them into the room here in Zoom. So let's move to the last but not least speaker of today. We have Dr. Scott Perkin, who has been engaged in biodiversity conservation for the past 30 years. He started his career in East Africa with WWF and IUCN, where, among other tasks, he led a film project in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area in Tanzania. He holds a PhD in international development from the UK. Scott now is based in Bangkok, where he serves at the head of the Natural Resources Group within the IUCN Asia Regional Office. The National Resources Group acts as a regional technical hub for IUCN's program in Asia, providing support and advice on issues related to marine and coastal ecosystems, species conservation, protected areas, forest landscape restoration, and the management of water and wetlands. Scott will talk to us today about the IUCN Green List of Protected and Conserved Areas, the new international sustainability standards that recognizes excellence in area-based conservation management. Over to you, Scott.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Han, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. Let me just try to share my screen. Can you please just confirm that that is visible?
Not yet. Maybe take a second to go up.
Still no luck.
No, we still see you.
In that case, maybe I could ask the UNESCO IT team to
Okay, yeah,
run
we'll
the
do that.
presentation from your end.
Yeah, and just signal us when you want to change the slide. Is someone doing it from our side?
Yes, just give me 1 second. I've got it. So
Okay.
1 second. Here we go.
Okay, here we go. Thank you.
Oops, did that just disappear?
Gone again, yep.
Okay.
Okay, great. If you could get it to the, yeah, perfect. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for the technical assistance. So my name is Scott Perkin, and as was mentioned, I work with IUCN. For those of you who are not familiar with IUCN, it stands for International Union for Conservation of Nature. We're one of the oldest and largest international environmental organizations. And rather uniquely, we're a membership organization composed of states, government organizations, and civil society organizations. And we have a special membership category for Indigenous peoples organizations. So what I'd like to do in the next 15 minutes or so is just to give you a very quick overview of the IUCN Green List. Next slide, please. Next, could I have the next slide, please?
Muntira? Oh, okay.
Okay, so what is the IUCN Green List? So very simply put, the IUCN Green List is a global standard for best practice in area-based conservation. So it's a program of certification for protected and conserved areas, national parks, natural world heritage sites, community conserved areas, nature reserves, and so on, that are effectively managed and fairly governed. So in essence, the Green List is a sustainability standard. It's similar to other standards you may have heard of, such as the Fair Trade Standard, FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council Standard, MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council Standard, and others. Next slide, please. So what is the mission of the IUCN Green List, and why did IUCN develop the Green List standard? In essence, we developed the standard in order to help increase and recognize the number of effective, protected, and conserved areas globally. So it's not sufficient just to create more and more protected areas or conserved areas. It's also critically important that these actually be effective. Next slide, please. So what does IUCN mean by effective? When IUCN refers to an effective protected area or conserved area, we mean that it's fairly governed, that it's being effectively managed, that it's achieving successful conservation outcomes, and that it's also responding to climate change and other global sustainability goals and challenges. Next, please. So there are a number of qualities or features to the Green List standard which are worth mentioning. We say that this standard is globally consistent and locally relevant. So by that, we mean that we believe the standard has global application. We believe that the criteria around which the standard is based are globally relevant and can apply to all countries and all situations. However, at the same time, the standard is locally implemented, it's locally evaluated, and there is scope within the standard to adjust certain indicators in order to ensure that it is locally relevant and suitable to the local context. We also have independent third-party assurance and validation to ensure that the standard is being appropriately applied. And then the third point to emphasize is that the standard draws on all of IUCN's best practices and knowledge products from the last 70 years or so. IUCN has been working on protected area issues really since its inception back in 1948. And this standard really draws together all of that learning, all of the different knowledge products, all of the different best practices that IUCN has developed over the years related to protected areas. Next slide, please. So how is the IUCN Green List standard structured? It's structured really around 4 components. The first is good governance, very relevant to today's discussion. The second is sound design and planning. The third is effective management. And when those are all combined, they should lead to the 4th component, which is successful conservation outcomes. Next slide, please. So this is the heart of the standard. As I said, it's structured around 4 components: good governance, sound design and planning, effective management, and successful conservation outcomes. Each of these components has a suite of criteria. There are 17 criteria in total. And then each of the criteria in turn have a suite of indicators. There's a lot of information on that slide, and I won't go through it, but I would like to just look at the good governance component in a bit more detail, since it's the topic for today's discussion. So next slide, please. So when we talk about good governance under the IUCN Green List, there are 3 criteria that we ask a site to meet. One is that the site needs to guarantee legitimacy and voice. And by this, we mean that there are clearly defined, equitable, and functional governance arrangements which allow the interests of civil society, rights holders, and stakeholders to be represented and addressed. Second criterion relates to transparency and accountability. And this is to make sure that sites have governance arrangements in place that are transparent and well communicated, that the responsibilities for implementation are clear, and importantly, that there is a grievance mechanism in place by which disputes and conflicts can be addressed. And the third criterion is around governance vitality and the capacity to respond adaptively. This is where we request sites to ensure that they have planning and management systems in place that draw on the best available knowledge of both social and ecological features of the site, and that they have an adaptive management framework in place that can respond to change. Okay, next slide, please. So how does the Green List get implemented in practice? Well, at the national level, it will start with a country or a jurisdiction making a commitment to the Green List. And then as one of its first steps, the country convenes what we call an EAGLE, an expert assessment group for the Green List. This is a body normally of between 10 and 20 experts from a diverse range of backgrounds covering both natural history and social and economic issues. And it should also be gender balanced. As one of its first steps, the EAGLE looks at the global standard and the indicators and assesses whether the indicators are relevant and appropriate to the country. And if not, they have the authority to revise and amend those indicators. If they are amended, then those amended indicators are put out to public consultation and finally approved. And then in the third step, individual sites, an individual protected area or conserved area makes a commitment to adopt the Green List standard, and they begin the process, which begins with a self-assessment. It must include stakeholder engagement. Members of the Eagle will also visit the site, and there will be an evaluation carried out. Next slide, please. So I've spoken quite a bit about the Eagle, and the Eagles are a central part of the whole Green List process. So it's really just to emphasize again that the Eagles are convened and trained and accredited locally. They are responsible for adapting the Green List standard to make sure that it's relevant to the national context. And they also are responsible for evaluating the sites and recommending them for green listing. Next slide, please. So at the site level, how does the Green List process work? There are 3 different phases. In the application phase, the individual site, again, will make a commitment to achieving the standard. It identifies stakeholders and supporters. It carries out a self-assessment to make sure that it's eligible. And then there's an eligibility check carried out by the Eagle. That can normally take place quite quickly, perhaps over just a period of 1 month or so. The site then moves to the candidate phase, and in this phase, the site must accumulate evidence against all the different criteria in the Green List standard and show that it meets those criteria. And it does this, again, in consultation with stakeholders. The site is evaluated by the Eagle, which will carry out a site visit. And then the Eagle and the independent reviewer will reach a decision on whether or not to recommend the site for the Green List. And then in the final phase, a recommendation is submitted to the independent IUCN Green List Committee, which is a global committee. And if it's successful, it's inscribed on the Green List. And the certification is valid for a period of 5 years. And after 5 years, it then has to be renewed. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the process is independently verified and assured. And the IUCN Green List standard uses Assurance Services International, ASI, which is part of the ISEAL Alliance. And this provides that independent third-party assurance and essentially makes sure that the operational rules for applying the Green List standard as set out in the standard and in the user manual are being properly and appropriately applied. Next slide, please. So the whole process is run through a cloud-based data platform called COMPASS, which stands for the Community of Protected Areas Sustainability Standard. And there's also a dedicated Green List website, iucngreenlist.org, which is available to the public. COMPASS is really for registered users only, but there's a tremendous amount of information on the IUCN Green List website. Next slide, please. So just coming to the conclusion of my presentation, what are the values of green listing? Why would a country or a site want to go through this process, which is I confess, quite complicated, and it is time consuming. I think one great value of this process is that it does provide validation to the site managers by international experts, by national experts, that the processes they're following, the management practices they're following are leading to the desired outcome, that they are helping to achieve those conservation outcomes. The Green List is also a way of achieving global recognition for local success. And for me personally, this is one of the things that I like the most about the Green List, is that it's a positive and inclusive message. So, there are so many negative messages in conservation. We hear about the red list of threatened species. We hear about World Heritage Sites in danger. We hear about the red list of ecosystems. We hear about species that are endangered and going extinct. But the green list is the flip side of that. The green list is the positive message that recognizes excellence in protected area management. And it's also inclusive. World Heritage designation will only be available to a very small number of protected areas around the world. But the green list in principle is accessible to any protected area or conserved area that manages to meet the criteria in the standard. Now, I should quickly add that IUCN doesn't currently have the capacity to support that kind of huge volume of sites, but in principle, the green list is an open and inclusive process. Green list also has tremendous communication potential. We've seen that it kind of strikes an intuitive chord with people and is a very good communication and awareness raising tool. It contributes to global sustainability goals, and I'll mention that in my final slide. And finally, it's very good mechanism for leveraging additional support and additional finance. Donors in particular like the green list because they know that if a protected area achieves the green list standard, they can be assured that their investment has been well used and that successful conservation outcomes are being achieved. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. So I believe I just have this slide and one more. It's just to mention that the IUCN Green List does support a number of global sustainability goals, including the SDGs and the Convention on Biological Diversity, and in particular, Aichi Target 11 on protected areas. So I'm sure, as most participants on this call will know, Aichi Target 11 calls for protected areas that are effectively and equitably managed, and that's exactly what the Green List standard helps to ensure. The Green List has also been formally recognized by the CBD, and at COP13 in Mexico a number of years ago, there was a decision that called for the IUCN Green List to be promoted as a voluntary standard. Next slide, please. Great, and I believe this is the last slide. And I think it's just important to mention that the IUCN Green List is also very complementary to the World Heritage process. So the Green List standard helps to ensure that the integrity, the protection, the management, essentially the pillars of OUV for World Heritage are maintained over the long term. The IUCN Green List standard can also be very helpful for tentative sites that are thinking of going onto the World Heritage List, because they can apply the standard and it will help them to identify gaps in their management that might need to be improved. And finally, the Green List can also provide recognition for sites that maybe don't make it onto the World Heritage List, but they're still extremely well managed. So the IUCN Green List provides a way for providing recognition and support for those sites that are being well managed, but might just not have the necessary OUV to make it onto the World Heritage List. Next slide, please. Next slide. And just to wrap up, to say that at the moment, the IUCN Green List has 59 sites on the list from 16 countries. We currently have 6 countries in Asia, which are working on the Green List, and 10 sites from Asia, which are on the Green List, and another 25 are currently in process. And we're in discussion with quite a few other countries around the region as well about adopting the Green List standard. So I think that concludes my presentation. I do have a short video, but I think we probably don't have time to show it today. But maybe it could be circulated with the presentations. thank you very much, and I hope that was useful.
Thank you, Scott. Certainly, we can do that, and perhaps maybe one of my UNESCO colleagues also can pop the link to the video just right in the chat here and on the Facebook, so that we can see that after this conference. Yeah. So so moving right along, we don't have that much time left, but I already see a couple of questions here for Scott. So I hope that you will stay with us for quickly a bit, and then for other participants, please feel free to send the questions through chat here or through Facebook. So the first question to you, Scott, is from Jan Bert. Sorry if I say the name wrong. And who wants to ask whether the experts that access the indicators for IUCN's green list include local peoples as experts as well, or are they only brought in at the later stage? Because he sees that if they are only brought in, not included at the indicator stage, and that could be a little problematic. So maybe you could explain to that. And then the second question from Greg Chiaioli is whether the conservation outcomes assessed in the green list certification process also include conservation of control aspects as well. So basically, is the assessment of the biocontrol diversity, or is only the biodiversity? So let's start with those two questions for now.
Okay, thanks for those questions. I'll try my best to address those. So the first question regarding the experts who involved in assessing the indicators. So as I mentioned, this is done primarily through the EAGLES, the expert assessment groups that are set up in each country. This is essentially a locally driven process. But there are open calls for applicants who are interested in joining the EAGLE. The applications are then assessed by the lead implementing partner in country, together with the World Commission on Protected Areas. And they are also reviewed by the independent assessor, ASI, the independent reviewer. So as I said, there is an emphasis on trying to make the EAGLES as diverse and as inclusive as possible. And from my IUCN standpoint, we would certainly welcome the inclusion of Indigenous peoples representatives. However, as far as I'm aware, and I should emphasize that I'm also not a green list expert. This is also a new standard for me. But as far as I'm aware, there's no requirement per se that there be an Indigenous person on the EAGLE. Having said that, obviously, when it comes to the site level assessments, it is critical that stakeholders be involved in that process. And that is where I would see any Indigenous peoples who are present near or at a particular site where they would become involved in the process, and that would definitely be key. In terms of the conservation outcomes, I mean, again, these will be essentially locally defined, and they'll be defined on a site-by-site basis. And I would see that primarily as being defined by the sites themselves. But again, through the stakeholder engagement process, I would say that values such as traditional ecological knowledge would be identified and reflected during that engagement process. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, there's a small question that follow up, not really a follow up, but also on the green list here, Scott, if you could take that. Is there any mechanism to mobilize member states to participation in IUCN's Green List? This question is from Suan Sovan in Cambodia, but I'm sure it's very useful for other countries to hear as well.
So we're just in the process of trying to roll out the Green List in Asia. IUCN has a small project which can provide technical support and a little bit of financial assistance, for example, to help with the meetings of the Eagles. And we're also hoping sometime this year to recruit a full-time regional Green List coordinator who would be based in the IUCN Asia Regional Office in Bangkok, who will be available to provide technical support and guidance to countries and sites that are interested in the Green List. I would say if there are any countries represented today on the call that are interested in the Green List, the first step would just be to write to IUCN. You'd be welcome to write to me in the first instance. And then we can guide you through the process of making a commitment and taking the next steps.
Thank you, Scott. We have a question for Dr. Prasad. What is the gap that when we use the protected areas co-management mechanism in the Keng Krachang as Uplong National Park and WEFCOM? Dr. Prasad, are you here with us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Talking about the gap of the assessment, it looks something like because of the participatory process of co-management is very active and very successful in the ground, but it's still what we call not open by someone law to support the process. Later, can say that in the higher officer of the national park or the Ministry of Environment, they not really what we call fully involved and support the process. Did something come up with I can say that the head of national park, why they what we call implement the process very strong, but after he changed his position or change to another place, so the new one sometimes cannot follow up the whole process of the agreement or the endorsement of the management based on the co-management process. It is one of the gap of one of the problem. Another thing, it is because of this, we try to make a good practice and model to practice the protected area or national park. You need to expand by policy or the regulation to other protected areas of other national park. This is not much bring and use expand to other places. This is another thing that PD is not what we call expand too much. I think that these are the two main points of the main gap during the assessment of the Wakatane.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Yeah, maybe we let's give Dr. Ghosh a question. So when you are presenting about the Manas case, Dr. Ghosh, and yeah, it seems like it's a very kind of smooth and easy and all, but I'm sure there were many challenges that you were meeting, were met along the way, and perhaps if you could just give us a bit a few ideas on these kinds of challenges that you faced and what was done to overcome that.
Thank you, Dae. Yes, I would personally say that it took a long time for Manas to come back as a World Heritage. And it is still very volatile, I must admit on this. And to me, the lessons learned is that capacity building is a continuous effort. It cannot be thought of that, yes, we have enabled, we have empowered the communities, and that's it, and everything will be smooth. But it doesn't happen that way. And each community, each local community is different in their approach. And one needs to come up with some local solutions. May not follow the book, but at the same time, there are certain communities, forest fringe, which need to be given the shared governance, and some which would need to be given the legal aspect and said that, no, this is a protected area, and these rights which you have cannot be entertained anymore. So it needs to be a balance between what is the local leadership at that moment. And to me, the lesson learned is that it takes time. And if there is a natural site, or if there is a wilderness area which is large enough, I mean, we could achieve success in Manas because of the sheer size of the heritage site. It's a huge area of 2,000 plus square kilometers. So it has the own intrinsic resilience in terms of the local or anthropogenic disturbances that which affect the site from time to time. But there are several other sites which were smaller, which could not bear the brunt of the local pressures in terms of conflict, in terms of resource use, and eventually they have died down over a period of time. So to me, the basics, the concepts of setting aside natural heritage sites is important. And how do we manage them using local communities, and what are the local, and these need to be done at the local level. They cannot be top down, they cannot be by the book, but they have to be in terms of a trial and error, and we can achieve success. In fact, I would like to add to a question which is on the chat group. I mean, this challenge of how do we determine stakeholders, and what is the mechanism to recognize the rights of stateless people? I mean, to me, this is another very, very important aspect that I unfortunately, I don't know much about. I mean, there is this terminology, which is, I'm hearing a lot these days, which is the environmental refugees or climate refugees. And in many of our natural heritage sites, especially in the Northeast India, in Southeast Asia, we do have a lot of these climate refugees which are coming in, which are impacting our natural sites. And there is a direct conflict between the local community, which was residing earlier, and these ecological or climate refugees which are coming in. So how does one balance it? What is the right answer? And because at the end of the day, the rights of these people, the survival of the people is important to me. But what is it that we would need to do is something which is still being learned. Thank you.
Thank you. But perhaps just a very quick follow-up question, and also maybe open to Terence as well. Is you mentioned a bit of the legal frameworks, and I think we all see that a lot of what we are doing about by the prevailing legal framework. About on the chat here, David Fengo also reminded us that many communities in the north, many of them do not have citizenship, which really make it difficult to engage them as official stakeholders for whatever we do. So in India specifically, how did you begin this process to start changing the law for the legal framework to be more open in recognizing this co-management system? And also maybe for Terence is what do you think, what could be the key measures that needed to push for successful legal reform toward co-management? of the protected areas based on your experience in implementing the compact, and then what kind of support do you think if Thailand were going to begin that process then, and what kind of support you think that UNDP and other international partners can do? Maybe Sonali, you could quickly finish, and then we pass the mic to Terence.
Right, thank you. I think, as I said, it's ever evolving, and even our policies, even our legislations are trying to recognize this. So for example, in India, we have since the 1990s, we have opening up and for co-management, for shared governance. So we have this famous model of joint forest management and eco-development, which has taken place. And very recently in 2005 and 6, we have the Forest Rights Act and the Biodiversity Act. So still we are evolving in terms of recognizing and acknowledging that the communities do have a stake in terms of protection and management of our protected areas. Perhaps, and I think and I'm very optimistic because these are the transition years. These are the years when the things will stabilize. How we view the communities, how the communities view the department, it's going to take time, and these models are evolving, but I think we are going in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And Terence?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a few responses to the chat. So on displaced peoples and migrants, I think there are examples from other regions in Peru where indigenous peoples use biocultural protocols to establish a kind of constitution to recognize some of the groups that might have come to live in the areas, and those groups. So the Wampi Nation have a constitution like that, which then articulates the vision for the territory. In response to the chat about the green list and the sort of review process, I think the green list is one important mechanism. The World Heritage Convention is another. The Wakatani mechanism is important for grievances. But it's important to stress that for the Protected Planet portal and the World Database on Protected Areas, there are multiple ways of submitting information about protected and conserved areas. So state parties do submit, but the global ICCA registry, which has been there for 10 years, is another way in which indigenous peoples can map their territories and voluntarily submit information to the registry, and that also is undergoing what is referred to as a peer review process, by which at the national level, indigenous peoples and local communities can self-validate ICCAs, and that's important because in some cases there may be non-substantiated claims. So, for example, in the Philippines, there is a peer review process at the national level for ICCAs, which also involves the CBD focal point, where the government recognizes the added value of indigenous peoples in also inhabiting areas which previously were listed as protected areas. And last IUCN Congress, there was a resolution to develop guidance on situations of overlap between protected areas and indigenous peoples and community conserved areas and territories. So that guidance, I'm involved with a group of other people from the World Commission on Protected Areas, is now almost ready. So hopefully between now and the IUCN Congress in September, that WCPA guidance on overlaps will be available. And just one last comment, which is that another mechanism, of course, is through from UNDP's perspective, which has a very large portfolio of protected areas projects funded by the GEF and other donors. There are grievance mechanisms through the safeguards that agencies now have to put in place, which I think is complementing what Prasad was talking about in terms of the Wakatani mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. So we are kind of running out of time. We're already 10 minutes behind. So maybe I would just let's just bring the last question back to where we are in Thailand, and of course we would have the opportunity to discuss further of this, and we have the whole session 4 that we could discuss this in more details. But then I would maybe give the last question to all the speakers, but especially maybe Dr. Ghosh would be a bit more difficult because she's not right here in Thailand with us. But then Terence, Scott, and Prasad, if you could, we already see from Prasad's presentation that there are already some good experiences in Thailand in participatory co-management process. And so, what do you think? How could the standard that you are talking? You have talked about the IUCN, Green List, and other standards, or UNDP Compact. How could these standards or processes be applied to Thailand in terms of legal reform or other mechanisms? Maybe if you have some reflection that you could share. Any of you can start.
Dr. Han, maybe just from my side, just to say that IUCN would certainly welcome Thailand joining the Green List standard, and we've already had some preliminary discussions, but we would like to follow up on those. And I think that the standard would be a very useful mechanism for enhancing effectiveness in Thailand and ensuring greater equity and fairer governance. So just to say that we would certainly welcome that.
Thank you. And how about others? Could I get maybe a few ideas from other speakers before we close the session today?
I like to make some idea on this, that Thailand and international agreement like IUCN and many agreement is not much implemented in Thailand yet. That this is one of the main problems of the. We always have a kinds of in national level to create a space of the participatory or the co-management is not really what we call suitable or progress in this area. So I think that it needs a lot of what we call the negotiate between the people in the grassroots levels to create power to negotiate more. At the same time, international just need to what we call negotiate or discuss or pressure how this international agreement can work well in national level. This is the most challenge for me.
Yeah, maybe Han, just to say that when it comes to World Heritage, I think IUCN as the advisory body has reflected on how Indigenous peoples in many of the natural sites add to the OUV. So, for example, in China, with the nomination in the Qinghai Plateau, the pastoralists are enhancing the OUV of the site. So I think for Thailand, in any World Heritage nomination, there's great potential to recognize the cultural aspects of Indigenous people's presence over generations in landscapes as part of the OUV. And I would just add that within Southeast Asia, it's worth maybe Thailand looking at other examples, like in the Philippines, where there's a very kind of strong recognition also of how Indigenous peoples are guardians of these protected areas, and actually help very often to minimize the intrusions from and threats from other areas. So they should, there really are opportunities to recognize the presence of Indigenous peoples in these landscapes.
Thank you, Terence. So with that suggestion, and yes, we are going to hear about more case studies over the next few sessions. So let me allow me to have a very express our thanks to all the speakers today, Dr. Terence, Dr. Sonali, Dr. Prasad, and Dr. Scott, for sharing with us your wisdom, and we hope that you will continue to accompany us over the next few sessions as well, because I think especially session 4 would be very interesting and important for us to map out what could potentially be done forward. And let us remind you again that every other Friday we will have a session. So the next one would be on the 7th of May. We would have the same Zoom link. So you could save this link for future sessions as well. The hours changes a little bit because sometimes we have to accommodate other speakers from other regions. But then the next one for sure is at the same time, between 9 and 11 o'clock. So we will also continue to live stream it on our Facebooks as well. So please spread the words. We will have the record that will be posted on our Facebook, on our website after the session, after everything is being kind of process. So thank you again very much to our two partners, Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute and Siriton Anthropology Center. Thank you to all the speakers and all the audience, and apologies that we have gone a bit over time. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
محمية أرز الشوف الطبيعية هي من أكبر المحميات الطبيعية بلبنان. صارت مع 22 ضيعة المحيطين فيها محمية محيط حيوي. دورها الأساسي حماية النظام الإيكولوجي الذي يتميز بغابات الأرز، واللي بتحتوي بداخلها 30% من غابات الأرز المتبقية في لبنان.
القائمة الخضراء هي مقياس دولي وضعته الاتحاد الدولي لصون الطبيعة لتقييم الإدارة الفعالة للمحميات الطبيعية.
الهدف الأساسي كان من أرز الشوف أنه تتقدم على الجرين ليست لنتأكد أنه نحن إدارتنا فعالة، إدارتنا عم تلعب دورة بحماية هالنظم الإيكولوجية، وعم تلعب دورة بهالتفاعل اللي لازم يكون بين المحميات وكل المجتمعات المحلية الموجودة حولها.
الاتحاد شكل مجموعات من الخبراء بكل منطقة من مناطق العالم، بنسميهم احنا الإيجل جروب، منوطة بأن هي تقيم الملفات بتاع الترشح بتاع المحميات.
أول مرحلة كانت مرحلة السيلف أسسمنت أو التقييم الذاتي. كل مؤشر كان لازم نبرهن إنه هيدا المؤشر نحن مطابق لأعمال المحمية. حطينا وثائق كلها صارت على الموقع الكومباس، في حوالي 200 وثيقة بتبرهن إنه المحمية هي بتطابق كل هالمعايير هيدولي. هيدا كله صار بالتعاون مع المرشد ثيري لوفيفر، وساعدنا ببعض الأشياء اللي ما كانت واضحة.
عملنا استمارة عن مواضيع بتخص المحمية، أهمها الحوكمة، الحماية، التواصل والشكاوى وغيرها. هيدي الاستمارة حطيناها اونلاين على الويب سايت المحمية، وكمان حطينا الكيو ار كود على المداخل المحمية، الأربع مداخل. بإمكان الزوار يلي هن كمان ستيك هولدرز بمجرد ما انه يشوفوا هذا الكيو ار كود بتاخدهم على الرابط يلي هو على الاستمارة.
قامت المحمية، محمية أرز الشوف، بتجربة كتير مهمة مع الأفرقاء اللي بيتعاطوا يوميا مع المحمية، اللي هي بسميها وورد كافيه، وهي بتقضي إنه الأفرقاء يكونوا موزعين على طاولات مختلفة، وكل طاولة في عليها ميسر محضرين نحن أكيد الأسئلة.
نحن حاليا بمرحلة التقييم الميداني. استقبلنا خبيرين من الإيجل ممبرز بالمنطقة.
احنا درسنا الملف كامل في بلداننا، كل واحد في مكانه، والهدف ان احنا نيجي نشوف على ارض الواقع ما يثبت الدوكيومنتس اللي اتقدمت.
بهالثلاث ايام بدنا نلتقي مع اصحاب المصلحه او ذوي العلاقه اللي بتشتغل معهم المحميه، البلديات، المزارعين، السيدات اللي هن ناشطين جدا بإدارة برنامج التنمية الريفية، أصحاب الخدمات، بالإضافة إلى اللي فيه شوية تضارب باستخدام الأراضي بيننا وبينهم. التقينا كمان بفريق عمل المحمية وبالباحثين اللي هن عم يشتغلوا على الأمور العلمية بالمحمية.
بنخلق من خلال القائمة الخضراء جو في حافز ان هو يشجع المحميات او الدول نفسها ان هي تقدم وتبقى على القائمة الخضراء.
وبالنسبة لمحمية أرز الشوف، نحن رح نضل عم نشتغل أكثر ما فينا لنضل ضمن هيدا المستوى، لنكون دايما مندرجين ضمن الجرين ليست.
So now we have come to the official end of our first session.